Hey, welcome everybody to another great REDX podcast. We are excited to have you here with us today. I'm Robert Sullivan. I'll be your host today, and I am joined by George Ratiu. He's an economist with KCM. George, if you just say a quick hi to everybody in the audience.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
We are super happy to have you with us as well. As we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. As always, go ahead and say hi in the chat and comments. Tell us where you're from, where you're joining us from today. And then this is a conversation. So if you do have any questions for George today, just throw them in there. I will bring up the ones I can. The ones that I can't, just go ahead and join us on our Facebook community, and we will be happy to keep the conversation going live there. And then last thing, but very important, make sure you subscribe to the podcast at redx.com/podcast or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So you always get the latest and greatest across this great country about real estate. And today we have a treat. George, like I mentioned, is an economist with Keeping Current Matters. And there are so many questions going on right now saying what's going on in the housing market, in the economy, and we're going to get those answered today. But George, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's a joy to join you today, and as well as the audience tuning in. And I'm so glad, to your point, to talk about what's happening in housing. I've been tracking real estate markets for well over 15 years, looking both at residential market dynamics as well as commercial real estate properties, fundamentals, investments, and more importantly, tracking how the macroeconomy, monetary policy, and capital markets are influencing local real estate. As so many agents, brokers, and consumers even know, so much of real estate market dynamics is local, as the old mantra goes. Real estate is all about local, local, local. And in that, I'll point out I've joined Keeping Current Matters this year. Very excited to bring the lens of economic analysis and market research to the members that we serve across the country, particularly because what we focus on is distilling the insights, the information on what the trends mean beyond just the headlines. Prior to Keeping Current Matters, I've worked in various economic and management capacities at Realtor.com, as well as the National Association of Realtors.
So what you just heard is that George is the expert when we talk about our real estate and the macroeconomic forces that we're seeing. I mean, today and always. With 15 years, that means you know what drove us in 2008, and will help us understand what's going on now. And the other thing I wanted to add about Keeping Current Matters, because George and all the folks at Keeping Current Matters, they have a special deal for us. I'll share the URL in a little bit, but it is a 14-day trial with their content, so you can be seeing the content that they're curating to help you talk about these somewhat complicated subjects with all of your potential clients. So we'll share that URL a little bit towards the end, but wanted to let you know that that's coming. So George, let's just start a little bit of painting the picture. I think everyone says, the market has shifted, or it is shifting, or we're in this transition. But tell us a little bit maybe of what got us here. I think everyone knows bits and pieces, but if you will walk us a little bit of how we got here, June 2023, and the economy we're looking at.
Absolutely, Robert. And let's start with where are we? Well, I would say we are at a surprising pace and place at the same time in housing markets. And I say surprising because for the better part of last 6 months of last year, and even the first few months of this year, headlines in the media called for housing to experience a massive correction. Some people called it a housing recession that's going to last possibly for another year or two. And yet here we are today with the market that's really dynamic, with prices which are rising, and with locations around the country where buyers are suddenly finding the return of multiple bids on a home. So with that, this is where we are. How did we get here? Well, for that, let's do a quick rewind to the fact that we've lived through an unprecedented period during the 2020-2022 period. And what do I mean by that? Not just a pandemic. We've had pandemics before, and they are tremendously damaging in many ways. When you think of the health, you think of the personal, the family, the community impact that pandemics bring. And that really has something that we've all felt one way or the other. What made this pandemic unprecedented was the steps that the government took to address what the government saw as a major challenge, the health concern. And what the government did is really send everybody home saying, we're under quarantine. And I called it unprecedented because back in 1918, the Spanish flu, back in 1950s, we had another pandemic. The government did not go to such a wide-scale economic shutdown in effect. So that's important. Why? Because the government then had to step in, right? Having, in a sense, closed the economy for roughly 3 months, the government had realized it's going to risk having people lose their jobs, get kicked out of their homes, and so on. So the government stepped in, and we saw twin forces. Number one, we saw the Federal Reserve, in a sense, backstopping the financial system, provide massive quantitative easing, meaning they started printing a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
They lowered the interest rates to zero, and then they started lending massively, both to the government, its main customer, but also directly to businesses. Then in tandem with that, what the government did, take a lot of the money was borrowing from the Fed and started sending paychecks to most of us around the country, saying, hey, here's some money, help, use it to help cover the bills. And suddenly what we ended up with is an influx of money into the economy, right, at a time when we had nowhere to go. At the same time, for a lot of people, what this also meant is that housing, home, took on a whole new importance. Number one, for health reasons, social distancing was a thing, right? Number two, with something amazing happening almost overnight, meaning most people who worked in an office found that the technology in place already allowed them to literally work from anywhere. And you may remember, you've been around long enough, back in the mid-90s when the internet came online, there was an implicit promise in there that someday you will be able to work from anywhere. Well, 2020 became that someday, right? And we've been living with that reality for the last 3 years. So that's sort of the background. As a result of that, however, when you think of all that money coming into the economy, and I'm not even going to touch on the pandemic-induced supply chain issues and ships not getting to port and goods shortages, which also contributed to prices. We've been experiencing this inflation we haven't seen since the early 1980s. And we've lived with this. Every time we go to grocery stores, we're still wondering, wait, what's happened to my budget? I mean,
Yeah.
spending hundreds of dollars, for groceries is with us. And so as a result of this inflation, what we saw the Fed do this last year, resort to really aggressive monetary tightening. Translation, they're increasing the funds rate, which is directly, in a sense, impacting the cost of borrowing for consumers, for companies, for financial institutions. Number two, because it plays such a big role in housing finance by buying mortgage-backed securities during the pandemic, the Fed also started pulling back from that market, letting a lot of those MBS holdings it had on its balance sheet roll off, mature without reinvestment. So all of this, in essence, resulted last year in what we saw, the combination of record high prices, which is the result of all that money coming in and people wanting to buy homes, combined with this surging interest rate environment, which suddenly faced people with, back in June of last year, with 5.5% mortgage rates, which they hadn't seen in a couple of years. We were, still thinking 2.5 is the new normal.
Yeah.
And suddenly, right, we had a complete change of market dynamics. Buyers pulled back, homeowners pulled back, and of course, as we mentioned, headlines started saying the market's going to crash. And yet, here we are, right? We have today something that's been in place for quite a while. Number one, extremely favorable demographics. A lot of young people, a lot of young households, and they see the value of homeownership and they're actively interested in buying. At the same time, on the supply side of the equation, we have an environment in which we have underbuilt for over a decade. Home builders, informed by the housing bust of 0809, have been really cautious and very measured in how they've been building. And that has not kept up with population growth. Not surprisingly, as you know, a lot of people tuning in know, we are in a situation where there's simply not enough inventory,
That's right.
and that's showing up in the market.
So if you had to explain to someone real quick what's going on, because everyone did think there was going to be this crash, right? And then there wasn't, and now we're still looking at a supply demand issue right now. You know, why is that here in June of 2023? We didn't see the impacts that a lot of people were talking about in Q4 and Q1 leading up.
Great question, Robert. And from the supply side, the inventory side, right? There are two main things to keep in mind. Number one, we have the supply of existing homes that really accounts for the bulk of transactions in any given year across the country. And that supply has been really tight. It was tight partly because we haven't had enough inflow of new construction. I'll chat about that in a little bit. But it's also been suppressed, especially this past year, by the fact that a lot of people who bought homes in the last 3, 5, 10, or 40 years are sitting on a house that's either paid off. Roughly 4 in 10 Americans don't have a mortgage, which from a personal financial standpoint, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Or for another big majority of those who have a mortgage, they have an interest rate under 4%. Many of them 2.5%, 3%. So for a lot of those homeowners, when they come to market, and I want the audience to remember something so important about real estate, because we sometimes talk about market trends and timing the market and not buying at the high. Most real estate transactions for the typical American family occur because of life changes, right? People move out on their own, people get married, people have kids, people retire. All of these events are what drive activity. So when it comes to this, a lot of the homeowners who are wanting to move for whatever reason are finding that many times if they're trading up, the house is more expensive, right? They have another 2 or 3rd or 4th kid. The new house is bigger and more expensive. And now they're looking at a mortgage rate that may be double what they have on their existing home. So you've heard of this as the lock-in effect. Some of that is also really putting a damper on supply. And then, of course, on the new side, and that was the other component of supply, construction really has been limited for roughly, I would say from probably 2009 onward. When you look at the numbers, and I'll just be brief about this, every year, historically, builders have put up about 1.3 million new homes. Why? Because we've had about 1.2 to 1.5 million new households that have been formed over decades every year. That relationship really broke off after the housing bust, partly because a lot of households stopped forming, right? Economic recession has that effect. But then even though household formations rebounded with a lot of young people entering the workforce, millennials, let's not forget, right? We've been talking about millennials now for 10 years, and we're still think of them as 20-year-olds. The oldest millennials this year are turning 42. So even millennials are decidedly moving into mid-age, and their needs are changing. So as these millennials have matured and came to housing markets, there have not been enough homes for many of them. The silver lining is builders have been really ramping up construction this year, but depending how you calculate it, by most estimates, we are short between 2.5 and 5 million new homes in the U.S. today, simply based on population growth. It's hard to build your way out of that shortage, in 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, so it's a different supply demand issue, but it's still the same idea that supply is not meeting demand in today, June 2023, and the economic outlook says that it's going to remain that way, or like is there, if someone's like, oh, if I just wait 3 months, there'll be more demand, is that something someone should wait for, or what's it looking like?
So to me, when I look at least at the next 6 months, the second half of this year, I see number one, really writ large across the market, something that's positive, even though it might not look so at first glance, which is we're seeing a normalizing of market activity. And by that, what I mean is we're seeing seasonal effects once again in the market. We saw a slower winter. We saw a ramp up in spring. Yes, still lagging the last few years, but really the last few years were anything but normal. So
Yeah.
if anything, I look, prior to 2020 for guidance. Now we're seeing a fairly decent summer when you look at pricing that tends to highlight that. And I do expect that seasonality to return in fall and winter, meaning I do expect a slowdown in activity and a moderation in prices, in keeping with what we've seen for half a century in U.S. housing markets. So the big question here is, if you're a buyer, what does it mean for you? And if you're a seller, what does it mean for you?
Yeah.
And to me, the big takeaway is this: sellers, many of them, as I mentioned, who may have been ready either to move into retirement, to move to a bigger home, to move to a different town for a job, have been reluctant to let go of their home because they were worried the market was going to crash. That's what they heard for roughly 6 to 8 months. They were so worried they're not going to basically get the same price or anywhere near what their neighbor got last May and June, that they've been holding back. The reality of the market today is, and anecdotally I've seen it firsthand, a lot of people selling this summer are getting at least as much as their neighbor did, and in some markets actually getting more.
Wow.
um, Mostly because the market imbalance is really keeping prices on an upward trend. So as a seller, this is not any worse of a time to put your house on the market. In addition, equity-wise, many sellers are in very solid position. For buyers at the same time, many buyers have been grappling with these interest rates, right? They are much higher. At the same time, it's important to remember that, in a sense, the rates we saw during the pandemic, 2021, 2022, were not your typical mortgage rates, and they
That's
were
right.
artificially depressed by all that massive monetary and fiscal intervention. And so we're not likely to see 2 to 3% mortgage rates anytime soon. Inflation moderating may bring them down, right? We're closer to 6.9 to 7. We've been there for a couple of weeks right now. We might see them move towards 6.5, maybe 6, as we go towards the tail end of the year. But this is the new normal. And if anything, rates have been in the 6 to 7% now for 10 to 11 months. And I say that a lot of buyers have sort of accepted this as the new normal and moved beyond, can I even afford a home, to how can I make the numbers work? So I say, if you're a buyer, what you've got to weigh, importantly, what's your time horizon? How long do you plan to be in your home? My view always has been, if you plan to be there 3 to 5 years minimum, what you're doing by buying now, you're locking in a fixed mortgage payment, and you have the option, if rates come down later, to refinance. But your alternative, which is renting, hasn't been very encouraging. Rents have risen.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you're not going to be in your community, in this home, for at least 3 years, maybe it's worth waiting. In part because buying a home is not a cost-free transaction. You have closing costs. You have many times repainting. A lot of people want to customize their home, so they spend all this money. You have furniture, moving expenses, and a lot of those can be cumbersome if your time horizon is short. So I think those are all something that people should keep in mind. And importantly, I would say, and this is where agents play such a key role, talk to someone as a buyer, talk to someone who understands your local market, because even within the same city or metro area, different neighborhoods perform differently, have different dynamics, and you may be able to actually get a much better understanding about your local market by talking to someone who is in that market every day.
Yeah, and that's so true, because there's probably people that, as you talk about, oh, they're this person can get the same price as their neighbor did a year ago, that are nodding their head saying, yeah, that's what it looks like in my market, and we're getting multiple offers. And there's probably other people saying, what are you talking about? I don't see this rebound that you're talking about, and they absolutely cannot get the same price they got a year ago. And that's because the economy is local, right? And by zip code, by breaking it down even smaller than that, sometimes by neighborhood even. So, but But what you are painting is this macro picture of what the economy as a whole across the United States is telling people, is telling you, and informing that that's what the market really is looking at like right now. What else would you have to say to an agent then, that because these agents are talking to people all day and they're either trying to find a home while inventory is low, or they're trying to convince someone that now is still a good time to sell, right? Those are the two problems they're having, and the objections they're getting. What are some things you would tell an agent to help them in with those problems right now?
Well, I would say, and I know a lot of agents are very good at this, absolutely talk to your client. And let's pick a potential homeowner who's looking to sell. Understand what is driving their motivation. And what do I mean by that? Someone who, for example, has second or third child and wants to stay within the same metro area by and large is going to be a different kind of client than someone who's maybe retiring and wants to change locations. Why do I say that? Someone who's retiring, let's say in a market like Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, or even Austin, Texas, for example, which have seen strong price appreciation over the last decade. And they're looking for a place that's lower cost, whether it's Texas outside of Austin, whether it's places like Tennessee or Florida, places with number one, lower cost of living, maybe no income taxes. The equity they have in their current home may be such that, and we've seen this over the last 3 years, when they come to market to sell, they're in much better position to sell, roll over the equity into their new home without any sort of financial strain, either because they can pay cash or they can pay more of a down payment and take a much smaller loan. So even at 6%, their monthly payment would not be as high, right? Comparatively, a younger couple with two kids looking to upgrade their home might be in a different position, meaning within the metro area where they're looking, the upgrade might have to be farther out to allow them to meet the existing budget with the existing interest rates and the market dynamics. So my view here is absolutely talk with your clients, understand where they are in their current life cycle, understand what they're looking for. And here's why that's such an important activity. And I say this because I know a lot of agents do this, and others may wonder, well, what's the worth of talking to people? We've found out at Keeping Current Matters by doing research that 65% of homeowners looking to sell tend to list their home after talking to a real estate agent. That's, to me, it's a tremendous number, in part because it tells me how important the role of the agent remains, even in a day and age when we are flooded with data, right? You want data on anything, whether it's neighborhood, whether it's prices, whether it's walkability, traffic, you name it, there's data for so much anymore. The trouble with a lot of this, however, there's so much. Sometimes it's hard to make sense of all the noise. So in that regard, I say absolutely talk to your clients, approach past clients that you still keep in touch with and chat and find out where they are in their stage. Similarly, on the buyer side, again, buyers today come to many times to real estate agents with a lot of homework, right? Whether it's that they go to a portal, they go to open houses, they look at so much information trying to understand real estate markets. But even so, with all that information, they still want someone to say, hey, what you're seeing is correct. Or conversely, as you pointed out, what you're looking at may be great at the metro level, but let me show you some neighborhoods where the conditions are a little bit different, and here's why.
That I love that advice, and here's some things that I heard you say that I think are just fundamental, right? One is having the conversations, right? And because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to make phone calls or door knock or this. You have to have conversations. That's how you're going to get your clients, sellers and buyers, right? Is those conversations. And two is being the expert, because people come to the agent because they expect you to know everything that you just told us, George. Because they don't have time. They can read headlines, but they're not reading all that. And even if they're reading all of the news stories, to put it all together and what it really looks like, they don't have that. And so they go to an expert They expect an agent to have that information and be able to share it and help them make an informed decision. The third thing I'd say, and this is most people tuning in right now are REDX customers, but I love this idea of if I had a list of leads open in Vortex and REDX, I can go over to the data insights and I could say, hey, that person is retirement age. They might be someone that would be, easier to talk to about if they're ready to sell their home, because what you just said is that those are the people that have the ability to make those kinds of moves, right? And so using the data that you have available to you to make those conversations, talk to the right people. If you got a limited time to have conversations, talk to the right people, and put all of that together to have informed decisions about what's really going on in the market. I think that's super valuable, George. Well, we are coming up. We're running out of time here. We have a couple minutes. So 2 things I want to do. One, I want to hand out this free 14-day trial to Keeping Current Matters. So all the folks over at Keeping Current Matters, they've given us, it's keepingcurrentmatters.com/REDX. Super easy to remember. And everything that George told us about, that's what he's doing all the time over there to help Keeping Current Matters then curate the right kinds of content for you to share in a newsletter, on social media, wherever it is that you can be informed, but also turn around and use that to share with your future clients and current clients and past clients. So use that keepingcurrentmatters.com/REDX, get a 14-day trial to find out more about what's going on in the market right now and how to get them into bite-sized shareable pieces of information. And the last thing, George, your time is so valuable, and I appreciate that you took time out of your day to be here with us, with our whole audience. I want to give you the last word. If there's anything else, bit of information, advice, anything that you want to share with our audience today.
First of all, Robert, thank you so much for the chance to be here with you and the audience. Number 2, and I think this is such an important reminder, we live in an age in which all the buzz is about artificial intelligence, chat GPT, technology taking over the world, replacing humans. And I want our audience to remember something critical. We as humans have been interacting with each other, seeking each other, congregating, aggregating, and transacting with each other for tens of thousands of years, at least recorded, probably even more before that. I don't see that going away. We as human beings are social. We want to be around other human beings. We want to interact with other human beings. So even with all that technology, I don't see the human touch, human interaction disappearing. And I encourage the audience to keep that in mind as they go and meet, help, and help their clients, help families and individuals make their dream of home ownership come to life.
Love it, George. And you're absolutely right. There is a place for you as an agent, and it happens when you make that connection. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, George. Thank you, our audience. Make sure that you subscribe so you always know what's coming up every Thursday, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And you can subscribe at redx.com/podcast. And thanks again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week.